Well, here we are at about the halfway, just about the halfway point in the Torah cycle. And each year, since we've been going through the Torah portions, tried to do something, either read something, do a devotional along with the Torah portion for that week. And this year, I decided to read the Torah portions and then record them and then put them up on YouTube. And I know some of you, I think, follow those or listen to those. That's been a blessing to me because usually at the end of Shabbat, as soon as Shabbat ends on Saturday night, it's usually the first thing I do is I try to go and record that week's portion. And I figure I can't go wrong if I'm starting the week off in His Word. Kind of lays the foundation for the rest of the week. And if anyone's interested in those, I can get you the link. But this week, excuse me, this week is another special week because it's a double portion, like last week was. And some weeks, going through a particular Torah portion, sometimes I can struggle without His guidance, struggle to come up with some good material. Some portions are just more naturally difficult to extract material from. This week, especially it being a double portion, there is no lack of material in these two portions at all. And I'm going to try to keep this somewhat simple, but this was what really stuck out to me. This portion, the first portion, is Achri Mot, after the death of. And the second portion is Kedoshim, holy. And the first portion comes from the beginning of Leviticus 16:1. Then Adonai spoke to Moses after the death of the two sons of Aaron, when they approached the presence of Adonai and died. Adonai said to Moses, "Tell Aaron your brother not to come at just any time into the holiest place behind the curtain, before the atonement cover, which is on the ark, so that he would not die." And this portion just kind of reminds me the way it starts off, that when we decide to approach God in our own way, in our own time, in the place of our choosing, what does that end up leading to when we decide to do it our way? Death. There's one way to come to the Father, one way to come to Him. When He says, "No man comes to the Father but by me," He has a way. In contrast, the second portion for this week comes from the beginning of Leviticus 19:1. Adonai spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak to all the congregation of Bnei Israel and tell them, you shall be Kedoshim, or holy, for I, Adonai your God, am holy." In contrast to the last one, if we want to approach God and yet live, we have to do it His way, be set apart, holy like He is. When I approach Him, we need to be like He is, His way, His time, His place. So it's kind of a contrast of death and life, the path of death and life in these two portions. And I know some of you are like me. I'm interested with interesting facts and figures and numbers and stuff of that nature. And so as we came to about the halfway part, the Torah, I'm sure some of you probably looked at this a long time ago, but this was the first time I kind of got questioning. Made me want to know, what is the center of the Torah? What is the middle of the Torah? And it seems like it's a simple enough question, but the more I got thinking about it, there's no simple answer, because we have to first define what the center of the Torah is. So one of the ways that, it's interesting is the center of the Torah is the middle of the Torah by measurement. And we could take this scroll and lay it out end to end and take a tape measure and bring it back to the middle, and then take a tape measure and go from end to end like this. But depending on how the parchments are stitched together and the margins and the way they justify the lines and stuff, It's going to vary with every single scroll, but it's generally speaking, it's going to fall right into the middle or right in the front of Leviticus somewhere, right near the front. Or does the center of the Torah, when we ask a question like that, is it by verses? So if we start from the beginning of the Torah scroll, from the end of it, and start counting all the verses back till we meet in the middle, as it is in the general Jewish reckoning of verses, it would land right about Leviticus 8, 7, and 8. Or would it be by words? We start on both ends, and this makes me tired just thinking about trying to do this, counting all the words back from both sides. It would come out to about Leviticus 10:16. And I spent too much time doing all of this, but as you can tell, though, there's already multiple answers to this question. And I'm not the first one to look into all of this for sure, or, even more tiresome, try doing it by letter. Leviticus 11:42, if you start counting words or letters back, would come about there. So already you can tell that the center is different for each one of these ways of looking at it. And all that's interesting. And it all has meaning, I'm sure. Nothing is by accident, the way it was written, the way the Lord had it. But I think it's interesting that when we ask those kinds of questions, Yeshua, in what is recorded anyway, never addresses these kind of things. These are never the more important things to talk about. It's kind of like what I mentioned earlier, the outer things that there's meaning behind all of it, but what's important is what is on the inside. So that brings us to, what is the center meaning of the Torah? We could ask it that way. What is the central teaching of it? What's the central mitzvot, or what's the greatest commandment? We could ask it that way. And I got to looking at this in different Talmudic writings, and this was a big debate when the rabbis would sit and talk through all of this, and is it by words or letters or verses, or they came up with that whole measurement thing. Maybe it was like that. But when it was posed as to what's the greatest commandment, and you throw that into the mix, there was one by the name of Yedidiah Shlomo ben Avraham Norsi that said, we must wait on Messiah to come and sort this out. That this is too complex that we might as well just drop it. We're going to have to wait on Messiah to come sort it out. But this question was posed even before his time to Yeshua. Obviously, this was debated, talked about. It's recorded in Mark 12. One of the Torah scholars came and heard them debating. And seeing Yeshua had answered them well, he asked him, which commandment is first of all? And my personal opinion is this Torah scholar was not necessarily trying to entrap Yeshua in a saying. I think he was honestly inquisitive looking. He had just heard that Yeshua had answered others very well, and he's like, well, I got a question for him. Maybe he'll finally be able to answer this. And Yeshua answered him, the first is, Shema Israel, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. And you shall love Adonai your God with all your heart, all your soul, with all your mind, and all your strength. The second is this, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. There is no other commandment greater than these. In one of these discussions about the central teaching, I found where Rabbi Akiva taught, love your neighbor as yourself. This is the most important rule in the Torah. But he was born in 50 CE, so he wasn't the first. He came after Yeshua. Obviously, he was the first to have said this, if not before. But he technically, I guess, didn't answer it correctly. When it was posed to Yeshua, and he said, "What's the greatest commandment?" The first thing he said wasn't "love your neighbor as yourself." So, did Rabbi Akiva answer this incorrectly? Or maybe he did answer it correctly. And that's what I want to talk about today is here we are at the heart of the Torah. And there's a old saying, goes in a lot of jokes, you put two rabbis in the same room and you're going to have three opinions, or maybe four or five. And in the same discussion, it goes on that Ben Aziz says that the most important rule in the Torah is the book of the chronologies of Adam. It's like, what? Like, the genealogies of Adam's the most important thing in the Torah? Kept reading on to his explanation of this, and he goes on by saying, well, what's the meaning of the word neighbor? Genesis 5 teaches that we're all neighbors. That's very interesting. Of course, he was born in the 3rd century. He's not the first to answer this either. Because someone posed this to Yeshua as well, one wanting to vindicate himself when he was talking about loving your neighbor. Then he goes and he asks, well, who is my neighbor? I'm going to always want to answer, have our answers and definitions for things. And this question is followed up by the parable of the Good Samaritan. Know that well, that there's a Jewish man walking down the road and he gets beaten by robbers and left for dead. And a Samaritan comes along and takes pity on and compassion on him when the priest and the Levite wouldn't. And in summary, Yeshua goes to talk of how a neighbor includes someone you don't know, that these two didn't know each other, someone out of your circle. They didn't hang out in the same club together. They weren't a member of the same fraternity. Someone not of your race. Samaritans, although they had some Jewish in them, they were kind of considered half-breeds. And even someone not of your faith. That they had much in common in some areas, but they parted ways on a lot of things too. Had a lot of things not in common. And so many times we tend to care for those almost in opposition to what this whole story is about. We can tend to care for those we don't know, those not in our circles, those not in our race, and those not in our faith. I've seen this a lot where so much effort, so much monetary things, so much prayers and outreach and stuff go to the ends of the earth, that sometimes in a love for our neighbor, we tend to neglect those that are the closest to us. That the priority almost gets backwards in a sense. Look at this verse in 1 Timothy 5:8. But if anyone does not provide for his own, especially those in his own house, he is denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. That's kind of like, wow. That when we're neglecting those, not just in our congregation, but in our own homes, that it's as if we've denied the faith and worse than an unbeliever, not just financially, but what about the mental needs, the emotional needs, the spiritual needs of those that are closest to us? This question, do we love those of our own house, those closest to us, as much as the neighbors on the outside? Almost the opposite of what Yeshua was dealing with in this parable. We're all familiar with the golden rule, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. I can remember even in school, growing up in the main hall, They had it right hanging up over the hallway, and it said, the golden rule, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And I used to think that the golden rule was, oh, that was something Jesus said. Yeah, that's where that originated. But how many of those in here, besides me, hopefully I'm not the only one, didn't realize that up to this coming to walk in the Torah that he was quoting from the Torah? Did anyone else not know that until this? That thought, oh, this was something that this originated with him, not realizing that, well, it did, but long before. This wasn't anything new that he was saying. He was quoting something right out of the Torah. You are not to take vengeance, nor bear any grudge against the children of your people, but love your neighbor as yourself. I am Adonai. Let that go on by. James, or Jacob, in chapter 2, he says, if you really keep the royal law found in Scripture, love your neighbor as yourself, you are doing right. But if you show favoritism, you sin and are convicted by the law as lawbreakers. So here, James, or Jacob's calling this the royal law, the law of the king. But if you show favoritism, you sin and are convicted by the law as lawbreakers. And I just want to say this, and when I read this, there is no place for cliques. So many congregations seen where there's little groups of people that do everything together. All the knowledge, all the goings-on happen to be with them, and everybody else is kind of on the outside. And I'm thankful we don't have that here, and I pray we never do. There's just not a place for that. Yeshua breaks down walls. We're the ones that tend to build them up. But there's a difference between the golden rule and the royal law. So back to Leviticus 19:18. You are not to take vengeance, nor bear a grudge against the children of your people, but love your neighbor as yourself. I am Adonai. And the difference really came down to the word here that we translate as yourself, kemo. We just said it at the end of the V'ahavta, where we say, V'ahavta le'reacha kamoka, kemo, as yourself. But when I looked up the word, I found somewhat of way deeper meaning to it than just love your neighbor as yourself. Because when I looked it up, how it's translated, how it's used, according to, like unto, as it were. So love your neighbor according to yourself. Love your neighbor like unto yourself. Love your neighbor as it were yourself. That's a whole lot deeper than just do unto others as you would have them do unto you. I could take my next door neighbor, for example, and I can do unto him as I would expect him to do unto me as a next door neighbor. There's a limit to what I would expect out of him because, we're just neighbors, there's a fence between us. But when I put this in, it's like, no, there's no fence there. You treat him, you love him as if it was you living right there. Do you love your neighbor like you love yourself? Number one, me. So do we love our parents according to ourselves? Do we love our children like unto ourselves? Do we love our spouse as it were ourself? One flesh, echad. So maybe there was a reason that Yeshua said the greatest commandment was the Shema. The central declaration of Judaism. It's the central declaration what we could call the center of the Torah, the Shema. And I want to look at this, some of these verses in these portions, because when Yeshua said the greatest commandment was kind of one, the Shema, two, in a sense, number two would be to love God, and three, love your neighbor. It's interesting, there's like three parts to his answer. Somebody asks him one question, what's the greatest commandment? He answers it in three parts. I don't think that's a coincidence at all. So was Rabbi Akiva wrong when he answered this, that loving your neighbor is the most important rule in the Torah? So in Leviticus 18, the Lord opens up a teaching, the beginning of teachings, of what love for your neighbor looks like and how you live it out, what you do. Leviticus 18:1, Adonai said to Moses, speak to Bnei Israel and say to them, I am Adonai your God. You are not to act as they do in the land of Egypt, where you used to live. He opens this up. I am Adonai your God. Almost the beginning of the Shema. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God. Lord is our God. I am Adonai your God. You don't act as they do in the land of Egypt where you used to live. The Lord our God, he's the authority. The authority, the definition of what love is, doesn't come from what your parents might have taught, whether right or wrong. It doesn't come from what grandparents taught or any other previous generations. Whether they were right or wrong about it, that is not our definition. That's not the authority on what love is, what it looks like, or how we live it. Nor are you to act as they do in the land of Canaan, where I am bringing you, nor are you to walk in their customs. So not only that, our definition of love doesn't come from the here and now either. It's not what society's doing around us, thank goodness. But you are to obey my ordinances and keep my statutes and walk in them. I am Adonai your God. So you are to keep my statutes and my ordinances. The one who does them will live by them. Coming to God in his way, his time. I am Adonai. 3 times, just in the opening of this. I am Adonai. Usually a reason when something's repeated 3 times. Look at this, Leviticus 18:6. None of you is to come near anyone who is his close relatives to uncover their nakedness. I am Adonai. That isn't love. And it doesn't matter what's been done in the past. It doesn't matter what's going on around us in society. But I think it's interesting how he ends this with, I am Adonai. Obedience to this is showing he is Lord, he is King, you love him. It's kind of the Shema in action here. Loving your neighbor, in this sense, is loving him. Leviticus 18:21, you are not to give any of your children in sacrifice to Moloch and defile the name of your God. I am Adonai. And don't think that this isn't done today, because it is. And in some sense, isn't almost every state at the moment having to deal with these very things? Going through trying to decide what's to be done about the children? Leviticus 19:2. Each one of you is to respect his mother and his father and keep my Shabbatot. I am Adonai, your God. It's almost here, it's almost like not respecting your father and mother, not honoring them, is almost like breaking the Shabbat. It's interesting that both of these are together. But by obeying and loving our neighbor, our parents, we love him because he is king, it's his law. And, as you go through these, it's no wonder that children are first taught Leviticus. Because although the beginning of it can tend to be a little slow and hard to understand, you start getting to these things, and these are very black and white, very do this, don't do this, this is how you do this is how you don't show love this way. Another commandment that shows how we are to love our neighbor, Leviticus 19, when you reap the harvest of your land, you are not to reap to the very corners of your field, nor are you to gather the gleanings of your harvest. You are not to pick the remnants of your vineyard, nor are you to gather the fallen grapes of your vineyard. Instead, you are to leave them for the poor and for the outsider. I am Adonai, your God. And he's saying, you're blessed. You have excess. Give it to those that have need. You have a field. Most probably don't. You have money, we have cars, we have houses. We're blessed. We have excess. Give to those in need. It's here it is. It's here again. I am Adonai your God. It's the Shema without words. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, is he Adonai your God? Leviticus 19:14. You are not to curse the deaf, nor put a stumbling block before the blind, but you shall fear your God. I am Adonai. What does deaf mean? Can't hear. And what does blind mean? Can't see. Do you think it's just merely talking about walking up to somebody that's deaf and can't hear and going behind their back and cursing them? What about the things we say about each other or other people when they can't hear, when they're deaf to it? That if they could hear it, what would it change? Would it even change what you have said? Or what about what we do when others can't see it, when they're blind to it? No one's seeing. But if they could see what you were partaking of or what you were doing or ingesting, or how would that change your relationship with them? And here he's saying, by not cursing the deaf, by not putting a stumbling block before the blind, you're fearing him. You're obeying him. Leviticus 19:16. You are not to go up and down as a talebearer among your people. You are not to endanger the life of your neighbor. I am Adonai. And this is an important verse to me because 1 year ago, right during this very portion, some of you know I used to do fishing charters, and it was getting very tiresome working a full-time job, going out on the water for 8 hours a day, 6 hours of driving on top of that, doing that 2-3 times a week. And it was beating me down physically. And one day I was coming home very tired, and I didn't see the light turn red. And this lady walks into the crosswalk, and I don't know how, a second difference, I'd have killed her, because I was going a pretty good clip through there. And I got so shooken up by that. And I had been praying about what the Lord would have me to do, and came home, and I think it was either that very evening or the next evening in this portion a year ago that I read this, you shall not endanger the life of your neighbor. I said, Lord, thank you, I got my answer. I'm done. But he's saying here not to go up and down as a talebearer among your people. You are not to endanger the life of your neighbor. When we're talking about somebody else, we need to be really careful, even if we mean it well, that when we're sharing something about somebody else, you don't know what that next person's going to do with that same information. Just because you have no malicious intent, you're not trying to be backbiting or anything like that, you don't know that the next person you're passing that on to is going to treat it the same way. And it really can endanger their life, their livelihood, Leviticus 19:32, you are to rise up in the presence of the gray-haired and honor the presence of the elderly. So you will fear your God. I am Adonai. You know, as kids used to think that parents and grandparents and all the elders didn't know anything, and I knew it all, and then found out I didn't. Learning that more and more, that how much wisdom there is. But by rising up in the presence of the elderly, honoring them, listening to them, you know, realizing, hey, you're not number one. Doing this, you're fearing God. You will fear your God, I am Adonai. It's his royal law. A little dry here. Leviticus 19:36, you must not be dishonest in judgment. In measurement of length, weight, or of quantity, you are to have honest balances, honest weights, honest bushel measure, and honest gallon. I am Adonai, your God. And this really hits me in my trade because I'm an estimator. I'm dealing all the time in length, weight, quantities, gallons. And when I give an estimate out and I'm saying, hey, here's the price that it's going to cost to replace your roof, and I'm saying that it's 150 squares and it's really 135 squares, is this an honest? Am I swinging the scale in my favor? Now, I don't know if you've ever seen these on gas pumps. They've changed a little bit, but I still see them place to place. You know, the Tennessee Department of Agriculture, Consumer and Industry Services, weights and measures. It's got the scale up there, hanging balance that equity may prevail. Wonder where they got that from, almost like it came right out of this verse. And when I go to the pump and the price of gasoline is $2.99 and I pay $2.99, I'm expecting to get a gallon. Not 3/4 of a gallon, a gallon. Am I doing the same thing in my work and the way I'm dealing with others? Not just monetarily, but even in time. Is the scale balanced, or am I using false weights? And that really hits me hard because there is always a tendency, especially in my work, to always want to try to swing it a little bit in favor of your company, your work. Am I giving somebody else what do I charge and deliver exactly what I've said? Leviticus 19:18, you are not to take vengeance, nor bear any grudge against the children of your people, but love your neighbor as yourself. I am Adonai. So here we are right at that verse, kind of the center of it. And he's saying, you know, retribution and grudge, holding a grudge, it's not to be done. And are we doing those things maybe on the outside, but what about even in our own homes, in our own house? And in case anyone thought that neighbor in this sense, because if you looked at this verse just by itself, out of the context of the rest of the Torah, you could say that it was maybe only talking about your fellow Jew, your fellow Israelite. But in Leviticus 19:34, the outsider dwelling among you shall be to you as the native born among you. You should love him as yourself, for you dwelled as outsiders in the land of Egypt. I am Adonai, your God. You know, you were once out there with all them. So, does that mean you treat them any differently now? Now that you've left where they are? So as you love your neighbor like unto yourself, as it were yourself, then we really do love God. We declare He is Adonai, He is Akkad, because we're obeying His royal law. So I think Yeshua put the Shema, love for God, love for neighbor, together in His answer very deliberately. 1 John 2, but whoever keeps His word, obeys, doing some of the very things that we looked at, whoever keeps His word, in him the love of God is truly made perfect. We know that we are in Him by this, whoever claims to abide in Him must walk just as He walked. Loved ones, I am not writing a new commandment for you. This isn't the first time this has been said, but an old commandment, one you had from the beginning. You know, this has been the heart of God, the heart of the Torah all along. The center of it was loving God, loving our neighbor. Loving your neighbor, you're loving God. Now this is love. So here's the definition of love, that we walk according to His commands, including the ones we just looked at. This is the commandment, just as you heard from the beginning, that you walk in love. His definition of love, not the world's definition of love, not anyone else's definition of love. This is love, His commandments. Some of the examples we just looked at. So walking as He walked, the living Torah, as it were yourself, loving as if it were yourself, self-preservation. You know, they say that's the highest instinct you have is self-preservation, preserving your own life. And is that how we treat our neighbor, our parents, our children, our spouse, with that kind of love? Laying down what did He say? That greater love has no man than this, that the highest form of it is self-preserving your neighbor as if it were yourself. The heart of the Torah. Moreover, I will give you a new heart. I will put a new spirit within you. I will remove the stony heart from your flesh and give you a heart of flesh. Put my ruach within you. Then I will cause you to walk in my laws, so you will keep my rulings and do them. Then you will live in the land that I gave to your fathers. You will be my people. I will be your God. I will be your God. The Shema, walking in His laws, loving Him, loving your neighbor. I'm thankful that in my struggle with this, because truly I think for myself, I tend to do a better job with people on the outside than I do with those that are the closest to me. It's kind of just a struggle. You tend to spend more time with everybody else. At least for me, working outside, I'm with everybody else more than I am with my own wife, and rarely get to see my kids or my parents. That they can tend to, all the people closest to us can tend to take a back seat. But I'm thankful that one day, we will be complete in our love of Him, others, our children, our spouses. So we say this so often, I'll put my Torah within them. Yes, I will write it on their heart. I will be their God, they will be my people. No longer will each teach his neighbor, each his brother, saying, Know Adonai, for they will all know me. From the least of them to the greatest, it is a declaration of Adonai. So instead of just reading the Torah portions, reading the Torah, memorizing it, that's all good. It all starts there. But some of what we saw today was how to live it, walking it out. Walk as He walked. And if there's, changes, I'm sure there are in each of our lives that we need to change to walk a better walk and learn to love our neighbor better. Maybe this can be a Shabbat that we can truly keep by showing love, not only for those on the outside, but our children, our parent, our spouses, loving each other as if it were yourself. This portion, last portion, Kedoshim, he's saying, it's interesting. This is how you're holy. This is how you're set apart from all other peoples that come up with their own definitions and ways of saying what love is. He's saying, no, here's my rules, here's my ordinances. This is what love is. So may we be truly holy as he is holy. Pray this has been a blessing.